G'day there, guys, and welcome to this session. Basically, giving you guys a bit of a overlook at the whole system. So I want you guys to understand how this works. So basically, we're looking at the massive system. For a start, it begins with microculture. So what is microculture? When we're looking at the entire human system, we want to understand where it sits within. So often we think of ourselves as an individual, but we don't often see the individual within the surrounding cultures and mechanisms from which it is formed and from which it grows. Just like an apple tree, you can't distinguish the apple from the apple tree. It is synonymous with it, yet we tend to think of an apple in isolation. Oftentimes when we think of food, well, the same is true with people. We often think of dealing with a person, but if we think of where that person comes from, it comes from a whole greater entire system. And so this is an attempt to give you guys a greater perspective of those systems and to really unpack that. So we look at microculture here, and that pretty much entails the individual. Now we're going to get right into the details of that later on, but for now I just want you to think of the DNA, the actual physical person and the emotional person. Now, where does that person come from? What is the microculture? What is it bathed in? Well, it's bathed in the miniculture. What is the miniculture? It's pretty much the family, the ethnicity, the amount of siblings in your family, the way your parents, the parenting style, all of those kinds of things. That's the mini culture within the microculture is formed. And if we go underneath that, of course, the mini culture is birthed within something even greater than that, and it's called the mesoculture. It's the marketplace, it's the village, it's the local community, it's the local sports team, it's the local supermarket, it's where you get your reference points, it's where your parents go to work, it's where they go to daycare, it's how they get influenced from all of those aspects at the local community level. And then if we look at within which the mesoculture is birthed, we can see there's something even greater than the mesoculture underneath. That is called the macroculture. Now, what's the macroculture? Well, it's more, think of at a national level, at a governmental level. It is the policies that get put out, it is the ideas, it is the ideology, the culture within which the macroculture is formed. And as you can see, every step you go out, you go to a bigger, more timeless set of ideas that encapsulate the subculture. But we don't often see what's behind the veil, what's behind what we see in front of us. But this is such a good model when you're trying to unpack why you do what you do, where it's come from, but also with other people, where their frame of reference comes from. And if we go below macroculture now, we can actually see something called the metaculture. Now, what's the metaculture? The metaculture is something that's even more timeless than the macroculture. It is from which the macroculture draws its values and ideas from, and that is, in fact, your philosophical worldview, and that's generally a lot longer time frame. So we're in a combination of cultures from a meta level, but if we think of the westernized culture as it is, we're 3,000 years old. If we think back to the likes of Socrates and Aristotle, some of those westernized individualistic principles that have so influenced the culture within which we live. And now that's not just true in the world today. We have China with a huge hybrid of cultures, but particularly driven from Eastern philosophy, communistic thinking, that kind of thing. So we've got to be very understanding of where cultures are being formed from and what set them up. And so underneath metaculture there, we have something beyond that, and that's called the master culture. And that even precedes metaculture. And in fact, a lot of what they draw from metaculture, such as philosophy and science, they've drawn from something deeper. And that is basically looking at things such as religion, things that have existed for eons, and they have they get a certain characteristic, they get a certain name, they get a certain label. And you'll notice that many of the same themes are around most of the major religions. You take Buddhism, you take Hinduism, you take Judaism, Christianity, you take Islam. A lot of them have similar types of ideas and stories within them. And so we've got to ask the question, therefore, where does the master culture, where does that draw its understanding from? And that is actually from the megaculture. Now, what's the megaculture? That is pretty much like it's the archetypal level that Carl Jung talks about. It's the things that sort of are timeless, that go throughout time. It's the stories and the narratives and the patterns. So if you're ever feeling like you're alone or you're discombobulated or your story doesn't make sense, you simply go back to having a look at the narrative of history. Throughout history, there's always been the battle of good and evil. There's always been the victim, the hero. All of those type of ideas are encapsulated within the megaculture. It is at that level we see the archetypes, the pure archetypes manifest. If we go one step lower than the megaculture, we understand something called massive culture. This is pure energy, primordial soup. It is the essence of life from which it comes from. And so you'll notice that different people will interpret these different levels differently, and they'll have different experiences. And so an evolutionist will think very differently when they're encountering the megaculture and the massive culture, for instance. Someone from Islam will think of those cultures very differently. Someone from Buddhism, again, will think of them very differently, but they still will hold some kind of sway and power. So up here, this lens is to represent the lens through which we see life. And so as we can see at the top, we're influenced by all these layers and levels at various different degrees, but it's our perception that shape how we actually believe and what we believe about these certain things. So if we go a bit further, deeper into the microculture, we can see here on the right side, we have the exterior, and that's what you see on the outside. That's someone's behavior. You see the results and you see the unintended consequences of what they do. Most people will be trying to fix that area to get what they think they want in life. Then we go one step down and we unpack the conscious mind. And then if people have a bit more insight, they tend to really hone in there. And you can become a great master of the mind of emotions. It's an amazing thing to actually master, but it's a whole lot deeper than the external level. And you could get into meditation and things of that nature here, mindfulness, all of that sort of stuff, and really become a master of your conscious mind. But a lot of people will stop there, and very few people enter into the subconscious. And that's what's ultimately driving, that's from which the conscious is drawing up the things of which it feels and the things of which it sees and the things and how the brain talks to itself. It's drawing from this whole meta-narrative of what's going on here. So you've got someone's core values, you've got someone's belief system, and you've got their identity, how they see themselves, what pseudo-exterior they've constructed in their mind's eye to manage different unmet needs and needs. And then finally, if you go deeper than that, you go into something called the unconscious mind, and there you have where the spirit resides. You have your reservoir of unmet needs and met needs. You've got your primordial energy, your personality, and then you've got your references, everything you've drawn to represent that. So another way to look at it is this way. You've got right at the top, you've got the unintended consequences. What drives that is the results that you produce in life, and what drives that are the actions you take. And what drives actions is pretty much the exchange between thoughts and emotions. It creates your actual state, your physiological state and your emotional state, which ultimately end up driving. And what we say is that we're first emotional creatures, and secondarily we're thinking creatures. And that comes out of the reptilian brain idea and the limbic brain idea, the emotional brain, that drives our decisions far more strongly than just what our rational thoughts will. But needless to say, there's this big exchange between thoughts and emotions all the time. What we really have to understand is that line there is actually the dividing line between conscious and unconscious mind. And there we have the bed of identity, beliefs, values, worlds, UBFs, LDMs, life-defining moments, unbearable feelings, echoes, and survival kits, which most people are not even conscious is just going on all the time. That's influencing at a conscious level. Some people don't even know what they're thinking or what they're feeling. But for those who are, that's what's really influencing those exchange between heart and mind. It's that deeper level of identity, beliefs, values, and worlds, etc. So what feeds those things? Well, it's our references. More specifically, our interpretation of those things that have happened to us in life. What's beneath that is the primordial energy, our DNA, what we're born with, our predisposition to want certain things or not to want certain things. And then ultimately, we're all born with a similar set of needs. Now, some will be more manifest needs and will have more desire to meet certain needs because of different reasons. And one of those reasons is because sometimes a particular need was not satiated in the way other needs were. So for instance, someone has a need for absolute certainty or safety and security, yet that need may not have been met early on in life. And therefore, they value that need more highly than, let's say, love. Maybe they received love, but they didn't receive that. Or maybe they received significance, but they didn't receive that. And so that's one layer. Your voids become your values. But the other layer is your primordial energy, your predisposition to want a certain thing. And this is at the unknown level, but basically we're born with a set of DNA that whatever reason it likes blue and it doesn't like pink, or it likes pink and it doesn't like blue, whatever it is, there's a predisposition that sometimes is not even influenced by the environment. It's just something that's inbuilt in the individual. And finally down here we've got something, that the little ego that represents spirit. The idea of spirit is that it can transcend all of this stuff, and it is outside of time. It doesn't need to be confined here, but what happens to most people is their spirit gets trapped in the early experiences of life. Well, sometimes not trapped, but sometimes inhibited, so it doesn't fully express what it's designed to express and to become fully human. Instead, it lives in fear to protect its needs. So that, in short, is just a wee mini lesson on this idea of needs, unmet needs, and the power. And I guess what you're asking now is, what we can do to meet these needs or to change this whole system. Well, the exciting thing is that we have there's a lot of things that we can do, and with the Ignite coaching we offer the tools and the tricks and the strategies to change, whether it's something to do with your mindset, whether it's something to do with changing your physiology or emotions, or whether that's something to do with finances or your actions. We do a full breadth of analysis of who you are, and then we break down exactly the things that you can apply. Whether it's meditation, or CBT, whatever the technique is, we look at giving you the best technique, because at the end of the day, they're only techniques. Some people get caught up, like a religious following at NLP or NAC. They're all great things, but at the end of the day, if we base our work on principles and we give you the right technique, if all you got is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. So the idea is just don't use a hammer thinking it's going to work for everything. You have a whole array of tools, and you decide to use the right tool at the right time. The more knowledge, the more tools you have, the more able you are to get what you want in life. So, this was just a wee heads up to give you a bit of understanding of what's involved here.